Good morning and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. I am super excited today to talk baseball. It's a little bit of a change of direction, but I've got my good friend Bob Kendrick on board today. Bob has been president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri for the past 10 years. And Bob, welcome. It's so good to have you on board today.
Oh, Terry, man, it's great to be on the show and even more special to see you again. So thank you.
It's been a couple years. I'd rather be there having. There's good barbecue in Houston, but man, we had some good food out there in Kansas City.
Now,
Hey, I got
KC barbecue it is everything that people say it is and more. And I
I,
love
I got
that
dressed for the
Kansas.
show.
Oh yeah, man, I love that Kansas City Monarch shirt and that particular team, Terry, that 1942 Kansas City Monarch team that, as your shirt describes, won the World Series that year. And my dear friend, my mentor, my confidant, the late great John Buck O'Neill,
Hmm.
played first base for that team. And he
Hmm.
always told me that was his favorite of all of his Kansas City Monarch teams. Now, he was a part of the Monarchs from 1938 to 1955, but he had a special affinity for that team because not just because they won the World Series, but the talent that was part of that team. They
Hmm.
had three future Hall of Famers in that lineup with the
Wow.
legendary Satchel Paige, Hilton
Right.
Smith, yeah, and Willard Brown. And Willard Brown was a great outfielder, got the nickname Home Run Brown from Josh Gibson. Now, I can
Oh,
tell you
wow.
now, if Josh Gibson nicknames you Home Run Brown, you must have some power. And
Right.
Hilton Smith was a great
Right.
pitcher down in that Houston area. He went to
Huh.
Prairie View A&M.
Right.
And Hilton Smith, Terry, did something that I don't think we'll ever see done in the game of baseball again. He won 20 games or more, 12 consecutive years. Yeah, incredible. And of course, the great Leroy Satchel Paige. We could
Right.
spend the entire show talking about Satchel because
I,
Satchel was that amazing.
we're definitely going to talk about Satchel. My son, when he was playing baseball, he had a coach here, a guy named Archie Corbin, great guy, and he named his son Satchel Paige. After this pitcher. But the history that you're talking about, I just love baseball, so I could talk
Yeah.
baseball all day long. I was talking to some friends last night, and they have the boyfriend or kind of the future son-in-law is playing in the Dodgers organization. He's a minor league player, and they didn't know about the Negro Leagues. I told them I was doing this podcast today, and they were like, "What was that?" And I'm like, "You guys are baseball people. You should know about that." And so I just have always known about it, but I guess some people don't. And so,
It
can
is
you just
still.
like explain what this was? Obviously, we had a pretty bad history in America, and so it kind of was born out of necessity.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Terry. And there are still so many. Even with all the work that we've done over now the last 30, almost 31 years of our existence to help kind of elevate the awareness of this history, there are still so many that
Right.
don't know much about the Negro Leagues. And as you just alluded to, many who don't even know that a Negro Leagues existed, no less to the
Right.
magnitude in which it existed. And of course, these leagues as an organized league began right here in Kansas City in
Hmm.
1920. So a lot
Right.
of times people will question why a Negro Leagues museum is in Kansas City.
Right.
It is because Kansas City is the birthplace
Right.
of the Negro Leagues. The leagues were formed literally a stone's throw from my office, from where we're recording this on the second floor of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum at the
Right.
Paseo YMCA.
Huh.
Rube Foster, another Texan, Rube Foster from
Right.
Calvert, Texas, led a group of 8 independent black baseball team owners into Kansas City. They met at the Paseo YMCA on February 13th, 1920. They had established the Negro National League, the first successful organized black baseball league. The Negro Leagues would then go on to operate amazingly for 40 years, from
Right.
1920 until 1960.
Wow. And so there was how many? Oh, by the way, so it's called the Negro Leagues. It's and which is a word that is weird to say in 2021, but it is
Mhm.
what it is. It's
That's
that was the
exactly
actual
what it
name.
was.
Right.
Yeah.
And but it wasn't just for black players. There were others, right?
The Negro Leagues, Terry, opened its doors to anyone of any color. The
Were there
only
white people who
thing,
played in it?
there were even white ball players who played in the Negro Leagues. The thing that I love about this
Wow.
story, because it was so counter to what they were experiencing. And they
Right.
just they refused to treat others the way that they had been treated. And so
Right.
they didn't care what color you were. All they cared was, can you play? And if you can play, you can play. And so there were a lot of particularly Spanish speaking athletes that called the
Right.
Negro Leagues home. And as you mentioned, there were a few white ball players at one point in time that played in the Negro Leagues as well. And so that's part of the story that we try to expound on, is the mindset that they had
Right.
that would again make them able to push aside everything that they were experiencing, but not succumb to treating others that same way. And to me, that's part of why this story is so compelling and so awe-inspiring.
Right. The thing that it, it makes me sad. Well, there's TV shows out there like Man in the High Castle, or the Apple show about landing on the moon. Like, what would have happened if history would have been different? And history was different because Babe Ruth didn't have to face Satchel Paige. And also then, Josh Gibson would have hit less homers had he been, like the whole baseball history would have been different. So America really lost out on not letting the best players
Mhm.
play against each other. And some of them, I was reading last night to prep for this, Satchel Paige actually eventually got to pitch in the majors, and the stats were unbelievable. The man was in his 40s. I've got him called up. He had like a 3 point something ERA in his 40s. They brought him back at age 59 just as a stunt, and he pitched 3 shutout innings. Like,
He was incredible, Terry.
baseball, Major League Baseball would be different had
There's
men
no
like
question.
him.
There is
Babe Ruth would
absolutely,
have hit less home runs.
yeah. No, I mean, when you talk about Satchel, and Satchel, as you mentioned, gets to the major leagues when we believe that he was 42 years old. And
Right,
that
but who
is
knows?
if you believe that he was born July 7, 1906, which
Right,
I absolutely do not believe. The
right,
man that died here in 1982, Terry, he had
right,
seen 76 a long time ago.
right,
Yes,
right,
Satchel
right,
was likely closer to 52 than he was 42.
right,
And,
right,
and you
right.
go back and look at his 1948 season. He goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA. He didn't get called up until July of that year. And if you also recall, Cleveland would win the pennant and then go on to win the World Series. It
Huh.
does not happen without Satchel,
Right,
because they ended up winning the pennant by one game. And that is what propelled them to get the opportunity to go to the World Series,
right.
where Larry Doby and Satchel Paige would lead the Cleveland Indians to a World Series title.
I
The two
did not
first
know
black
that.
players to play in a World Series was Larry Doby and Satchel Paige.
I did
And
not
so,
know that.
yeah.
Wow.
And as we look at Larry Doby, we kind of say that he was the second man to walk on the moon. Jackie was the first, and Larry Doby was the second man. But kind of like Buzz Aldrich, nobody ever remembers the second man that walked on the moon.
That is funny. That is amazing. So Jackie was 1947,
Yes.
and we have a little history with that.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Incredible history.
Yeah, I was on when you get to fly in space, you get to pick what things you want to bring up there. And I'm a big baseball guy. So I was like, I want to bring something to honor Jackie Robinson. And he's number 42. And I was also on Expedition 42. So there was a natural fit. And so anyway, so I brought this jersey, took a picture of me wearing it in space. And every year I tweet Jackie Robinson Days on April 15th. So I always tweet it out, and I tweet about your museum just to, point people in that direction. Um, and then so we donated it there. I brought it to
Yeah.
the museum. That was a cool day.
It hangs proudly inside the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as part of our Jackie Robinson Shrine.
Right.
So your jersey is hanging with the jersey that the late great Chadwick Boseman wore
Oh,
in the film 42, his
yeah.
Monarch jersey, which was presented to me on the red carpet for our red carpet Hollywood screening of the
Oh,
film in
wow.
2013. And it was special then. It's even more special now since we've lost this incredibly talented young man.
He was
And
so
so
amazing.
he was
I
really
love him.
amazing.
Yeah. I
And,
love
and he
Chadwick.
became Jackie Robinson in that
Yeah.
film 42. And then you also be pleased to know that your jersey is also hanging next to the jersey of Mariano Rivera,
Oh,
the
yeah.
last to wear
Right.
42 in the
Right.
major leagues, and soon Ken Griffey Jr. because we've asked to get his jersey because he was the guy who kind of pushed for the effort to wear 42.
Right.
Initially, he wanted to wear it for himself,
Right.
but the commissioner office loved the idea so much that he said, we're going to put everybody in 42.
Right.
And that's how it was born. And so, yeah, it's a nice shrine that we've created to Jackie.
Good.
But your 1949 Brooklyn Dodger jersey of Jackie is hanging proudly inside the Negro League Baseball
That's
Museum.
awesome.
It was very
That gave
special,
me
and can't
goosebumps.
thank you. And can't thank you enough for that.
Well, the Hall of Fame, that jersey came from the Hall of Fame, actually. They're the ones that provided it. And so for those who don't know, so Jackie was number 42. So the Major League Baseball retired that number because he was the first Black player in baseball. And it's a, this landmark change in American society. It was it was baseball, but it was obviously much more than baseball. And the movie is called 42. Chadwick Boseman stars as Jackie Robinson. That's an incredible movie. Harrison Ford is Branch Rickey. And anyway, I think there's some quote like, I don't care about white or black. I just care about green or something. And he wanted the money or the tickets. But anyway, it's a great story. And I read I Had a Hammer, Hank Aaron's book. That book's probably almost 30 years old, but Hank Aaron's all-time home run champion in my mind, and he really is. So I never knew his history. I always just, I don't know, as a kid, he was famous. I remember they had cheesy songs out on the radio about him and stuff in a candy bar. And so I never knew his background, but he was right in the middle of that whole racism, growing up in Alabama. And he hit the wrong way. He didn't hold it back right.
Yeah, he hit what we call cross-handed.
Right.
and for those who might be hearing that term for the first time, in the case of Henry Aaron, he was a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top.
Right.
And
so I hold it back like this, but he held it like that.
Exactly. And that is unorthodox because the fear is that you would break your wrist hitting in that manner. Now, this was Henry Aaron as he was 18 years old, joining the Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro Leagues, which again surprises so many folks because they had no idea that one of this game's all-time greatest players' career began in the Negro League, 1952, with the Indianapolis Clowns. At that time, Terry, he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. And so really the Clowns didn't want to tinker with this kid's swing because he is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. So when he gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top, and the rest, as we say, is history. He was shortly after discovered by the Boston Braves, who would become the Milwaukee Braves, who of course would become the Atlanta Braves. Henry Aaron will go down in the sport as one of his all-time greatest players.
Yeah, he definitely is. So he started out in the major. Well, he went to Jacksonville too, I think, for minor leagues.
Maybe. Yeah, he did a little stint in Jacksonville and then in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Before getting to the major leagues.
Not for long, right?
No, he was in Eau Claire in Wisconsin. They had projected that it was going to take him 5 years when they signed him away from the Indianapolis Clowns. We've seen, we've got a copy of the scouting report, and the scouting report, basically was hailing him for his temperament, the calmness, the power. I don't know if anybody expected him to hit 755 home runs though, because he just hit the ball hard. And I don't even think Mr. Aaron would have looked at himself as a home run hitter. He was a guy who hit the ball hard, and it just happened to go over the wall 755 times. But
he prided himself on line drives and just hitting the ball hard.
Just hitting the ball hard somewhere. And they thought 3 years later, Henry Aaron is in the major leagues and never looked back.
No, I don't. I'm guessing he didn't go back down. So when Roger Maris was chasing Babe Ruth's 61, I guess, the single season home run record, he went through a lot of stress. I think that gave him PTSD. It was just awful because everybody loved Babe Ruth and they hated the guy that was gonna. Now you can imagine a few years later when that's a black man, what Henry Aaron had to go through was just amazing. I mean, it was so awful. And guys like Jackie and Henry, they handled themselves with grace. Like if people treated me that way, I would not be graceful.
And Terry, it took Mr. Aaron 25 years, literally,
Yeah.
before he was able to celebrate what many believe to be the most, I think, amazing accomplishment, sports accomplishment, most prestigious sports
Yeah.
accomplishment of all time because of how challenging it was for him and
Right.
his family. You know,
Right.
I think, you know, so we've been so far removed from that. I was almost 12 years old when
Mhm.
Henry Aaron hit home run 715 to break Ruth's record.
Oh, wow.
And Mr. Aaron, I want people to understand this is 1974.
Right.
This hadn't been that long ago.
It's not 20. We're
And
not enlightened in
no,
2020. Yeah.
no. And his family is in hiding. His
Right.
family had to be in hiding.
Right.
He was getting death threats,
Yeah.
nearly 1 million pieces of hate mail
Yeah.
because of what you just mentioned. A
Yeah.
black man in the deep South
In
about
Atlanta.
to break, yeah,
Yeah.
about to break the record of this fabled white baseball legend, and people could not handle that notion. And yet, as you also mentioned, he handled himself with such grace, class, and dignity, and still had the laser focus to be able to go out there. He doesn't know if he's going to make it around the bases when he hit that home run. And
Right.
if you remember, the two young kids run out
Yeah.
on the field,
Yeah.
and they were running out on the field to celebrate.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
do you also realize that there were snipers in the ballpark? That Henry Aaron's bodyguard was armed because
Right.
of all the death threats, and
Right.
how tragic this could have turned if
Yeah.
somebody had gotten trigger happy thinking those kids were
Right.
out there to try to do something to the hammer.
To attack them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
also recall when he gets to home plate, his mama, she
Mm.
gives him the biggest hug, but you'll also notice that she turns so that she could shield her baby because she's afraid that somebody's going to try to
Gonna
shoot
shoot
him,
him.
and
Right.
she was prepared to take the bullet for her baby. Now that's a mother's love there. That's a mother's love to its absolute fullest. But you can imagine again psychologically how much weight that had to be on any human being to have to deal with that. And then when we welcomed him to the museum in 1999, 25 years later, Major League Baseball is doing this tour with Mr. Aaron to celebrate that accomplishment. 25 years later, he finally had an opportunity to exhale and really kind of soak in what he had accomplished as a
Yeah.
ball player. And we were thrilled to be a part of that experience. He's my all-time favorite baseball player, my
He-
childhood idol as a kid growing up in Georgia. And
Yeah.
the only person that I've ever been starstruck around, and up until the day he died, I was always starstruck when I was
Yeah.
around Henry Aaron.
When I read his book, it I he became my favorite player for sure. Um, what was his number? 44?
44.
Yeah.
44,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that was my son took that number as a kid. For some reason we were just talking about 42. My brain got of course Henry Aaron was 44. But when this is Atlanta in the
Yes.
70s, and the white fans are going crazy too. There were lots of
Yes.
white people that
Yes.
liked them and cheered for. It
Well,
wasn't it was just like a
no,
handful,
no.
you know?
No. It goes back something that Terry, that Buck O'Neill once said to me. The people who came to boo Jackie, they
Mhm.
weren't baseball fans. They were
Right.
haters. They
Right.
may not have ever been to a ball game. They came expressly
Right.
to spew hate.
They
The
were just
real baseball
ignorant.
fan, yeah, the real baseball fan don't care. And if you remember the great call from Vin Scully, that's what he talked about.
Right.
That here's this black man in the deep South getting a standing ovation
Right.
from what was predominantly a white crowd.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of sports.
It is.
Yeah,
Yes.
nothing has
It's more than
bridged.
sports. It's
Yeah,
more than
nothing
sports.
has bridged the racial divide like sports in our society.
But the pressure that it put on Jackie and Hank and
Oh
Satchel
yeah.
and thousands of others, like it's PTSD. I'm not a psychologist, but it's got to scar them. I've had a few people hate on me, and it scars me. And they had millions of people hate on them, right?
You talk about people having to have thick skin.
Yeah. Oh my
Well,
God.
they had to have that. They had to be able to block out the noise.
Right.
And it was much the same for those players in the Negro Leagues, because in many regards, Terry, the
Right.
baseball field was their sanctuary.
Right.
Their challenges was moving about the highways and byways of our country,
Right.
not knowing where you could stop to get something to eat or have a place to stay. And
Yeah.
then for those Black players who transitioned from the Negro Leagues into the major leagues, you had to deal with a level of isolation.
Right.
You had to deal with the reality that no one wanted you to be there.
Right.
You know, your own teammates really didn't want you to be there because
Right.
chances are you had taken the job of a friend of theirs.
Of a white player.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, not
And then that
chances
had
are for sure. At the
no, no,
beginning,
no. No, you
100%.
had.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you had.
Yeah.
You
Right.
had taken a friend's job.
Right.
And there was also this inherent fear from that average major leaguer, like,
Right.
oh hell, you know, I could be next.
Right.
And so there was this kind of this kind of shield around. So you had to kind of deal with all of that. And
Right.
then you had those who were coming in to hate on you just because of the color of your skin.
Right.
But as these courageous athletes started to play the game well, you started to see those mindsets start to diminish, particularly within the clubhouse. Because what now you're seeing, you know, the sad thing about racism or prejudice in particular is that much of it is derived from what we heard about somebody.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
somebody told you I was this way, and somebody told me you was this way, and then that is embedded in our minds and unfortunately in many of our hearts. But then we see each other through sports up close and personal.
Right.
When Jackie Robinson walked into that locker room with the Brooklyn Dodgers, he
Right.
was nothing like the stereotypical depiction of Black
Right.
athletes had been.
Right.
And so people, whether, you know, they all of a sudden say, well, he ain't like that. And here was Jackie, bright,
Right.
articulate, tremendously athletic. And then Brooklyn started to win.
Right.
And Jackie was at the heart of Brooklyn winning. And
Right.
all of a sudden, it didn't matter what color Jackie was. And then you saw white kids. You saw white kids saying, I'm Jackie Robinson. Yeah, but that's the beauty of being a child. Yeah, our
Right.
kids don't see color. They just
Today,
saw a
right.
great ball player.
Today, my hope is in the young people, because young people are like, what the hell are you old people talking about? Or I think
Exactly.
young people accept, you know, people from different backgrounds a lot better than old people do. There are hope. Yeah.
No, I tell people all the time, we could learn a lot from our children. We spend so much time trying to steer and guide our children. Every
Right.
now and then, Terry, we need to take a step back
Yeah.
and start to see life through the eyes of a child, that beautiful innocence in which they see life.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to Jackie. My favorite part of Jackie Robinson is stealing home. He's got a famous, I think, time or several times, right? That was
several times. He stole home,
Yeah.
I don't know, 17, 18 times when he gets to the major leagues, because he took that style of play that he learned in his one season in the Negro Leagues.
Right.
And I think a lot of people did not know that his career began in the Negro Leagues here in
Right.
Kansas City in 1945. And so I think a lot of times people, Terry, think Jackie just walked out of nowhere and started playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, but his real rookie season was here in Kansas City in 1945. And he quickly adapted that Negro League style of play. Bold.
It was aggressive. Yeah.
Daring,
It was aggressive.
Oh, it fit him to a T, because he was aggressive by nature.
Right.
And so when Jackie got to the major leagues, a lot of pitchers were still going into the windup when a runner on third base.
Right.
And then Jackie comes in, he starts
He's not stealing. I'll pitch out of the windup. Yeah. Did he ever get caught? If he stole 17 times, he must have gotten caught.
I'm sure he got caught. You know, I had to go back and look at the numbers and see how many times he got caught. But I can tell you now, he was successful more times than he got caught. And I can tell you, man, you talk about daring. When you steal home, that is extremely daring. Particularly when you got a right-hand batter.
Yes, there's a man with a big bat. Yeah, and the catcher's in armor, and there's a pitcher throwing a ball 90 miles an hour, and all of this is happening.
Yeah,
but he did it in the World Series, right? That's
Yogi, if Yogi was alive today, he'd still be screaming he's out. He's probably somewhere in that great somewhere still saying that Jackie was out.
Yogi Berra was the catcher for the Yankees, and so there's so many good things about that. A, it's just ballsy. B, he did it in the World Series, and C, it was against the Yankees, and just everything.
Oh yeah, yeah, everything about
perfect. Yeah, everything about it was great. So let's talk about some more players from the Negro Leagues. As I was reading last night, John Henry Lloyd, Pop Lloyd.
Oh, Pop Lloyd, yes.
Babe Ruth said that he was the best baseball player of all time.
And
I had not heard of him.
Because he's an older era Negro Leaguer.
Right.
And see, that older era Negro Leaguer doesn't get nearly as much love because the guys who expounded on the Negro Leagues that we kind of got introduced to were the likes of Buck O'Neill and Monty Irvin. They were telling us about their contemporaries. And so that early era, that turn of the century Negro League player really didn't get as much love. And that was John Henry Pop Lloyd, who, for Ruth to call him the greatest baseball player he had ever seen, that's a tremendous compliment. Yeah. And John Henry Pop Lloyd was a big shortstop. We got him at second base here at the museum because he played, like most, played multiple positions, but primarily shortstop.
Right.
And so, Terry, he was a shortstop that was in the mode physically of a Alex Rodriguez, a Derek Jeter.
Right.
Big shortstop.
Cal Ripken was like the first.
Yes. Big shortstop.
Yeah.
Great range, great arm with power.
Right.
You know, you don't typically get that kind of power from the shortstop position. You got it with Alex, but Derek didn't have that same kind of power. I remember taking Derek Jeter on a tour of the museum, and I was talking to him about some of the exploits of Pop Lloyd, and he was just absolutely amazed.
I got to bring back to Cal Ripken. I'm a Baltimore guy, so I got to give him. He was like the first modern era power shortstop.
Yeah.
But so, back in the day, that was before the real leagues had formed. It's kind of hard to tell. You know, I guess it was just more disorganized then.
He had some crossover, but the challenges that you had in the early era of Black baseball was that because it did not have a true organized structure, it was so haphazard. It was very
like barnstorming.
Exactly. It was a lot of barnstorming. It was difficult for these guys to get games. Booking agents were taking pretty much all of the money. And really it was through the urgence of the Black press that pushed for a formalized Black baseball structure, which is what ultimately gave us the Negro Leagues formed here again in Kansas City in 1920.
So, Bob, take us back 100 years, because today sports is it's pretty much the best players play, but in the Black community in America, obviously football and basketball are where the best athletes go. Not all of them, but you know, obviously that's a lot go that way. And 100 years ago, that was not necessarily true, right? It was a lot. A lot of the best athletes went into baseball.
Going to baseball. Yeah, they were going to baseball. Yeah. And the primary reason for that, Terry, is that basketball and football, even though you had an NFL and you eventually would have an NBA, they were still perceived, those sports were still perceived to be collegiate sports. So if you wanted to make a living in a sport, team sport, it was going to be baseball. And as a result, baseball was drawing the best athlete. Major League Baseball was getting the best white athlete. The Negro Leagues were getting the best Black and Hispanic athlete. Because that was where you could showcase your world-class abilities. And when we talk about great athletes, we already talked about Jackie Robinson, who was a four-sport star at UCLA. And baseball was his weakest sport. Yeah, baseball was his weakest sport, Terry.
What did he
was
play?
A much better basketball, football, track athlete, some say an even better tennis player. So there was nothing that Jackie could not do. And so when I tell people that there were other baseball players in the Negro Leagues better than Jackie, it's not to disparage Jackie. It just speaks to the immense talent that was there in the Negro Leagues. But Jackie is one of the greatest athletes in American sports history.
So I guess I bring up that point because, obviously a lot of those men could have played Major League and, they were that level of talent. But I would say even more so 100 years ago than today, because today a lot of the top basketball and football players are not like Bo Jackson, for example. But back
I'm
then it
glad you mentioned that name.
was even
I'm
more
really
so.
glad you
Yeah.
mentioned that name
Yeah.
because for me, in my opinion, the three greatest athletes of the 1980s
Hmm.
were Bo Jackson, Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
and Deion Sanders. And
Right.
their first loves were all baseball.
Right.
And that's the athlete that you would have been getting had it not been for the popularity of the
Right.
NBA and the NFL. And so these extraordinarily gifted athletes who were multi-sport stars, we
Yeah.
just opened a new exhibit here at the museum called Barrier Breakers.
Hmm.
And in that Barrier Breaker exhibit, we highlight the players who integrated their major league teams after Jackie.
Right.
But when we start to look at some of the stars, you look at, and there's Jackie, a running back there at UCLA, All American tailback at UCLA.
Right.
And there's a basketball player by the name of Nat Sweetwater Clifton. Well,
Okay.
Sweetwater was the first Black player to sign an NBA contract. Wasn't the first to play.
Right.
Earl Lloyd beats him to the floor with the
Right.
Detroit Pistons,
Huh.
but Sweetwater was the first to sign an NBA contract with the New York Knicks. Well, Terry, Nat Sweetwater Clifton was a 6'8" first baseman for the Chicago American Giants. And there's Goose
Wow.
Tatum, who is in the Basketball Hall of Fame in
Right.
Springfield. Great
Right.
basketball player for the Harlem Globetrotters. Well,
Right.
Goose Tatum was a slick fielding first baseman for the
Huh.
Indianapolis Clowns. The
Huh.
list just goes on and on of these
Right.
crossover athletes, but
Multi-sport. Yeah.
baseball, multi-sport athletes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a good, and I mean, they used to do it. They still do it today. I like my son played baseball, basketball, football, and I've talked to a bunch of major leaguers, and the advice that I always get is tell them to play different sports, and
Yeah.
just to develop their athleticism for kids today. Doesn't matter what, if you're white or black or whatever. It's just playing
Yeah.
different sports is a good. I think it's good, and then you
I
don't
think it's
wear
great.
yourself out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's great. I honestly, I hate the specialization that we
Yeah.
see in youth athletics because now if you play baseball, you're playing baseball almost year round.
Right.
And I
Where's
really
your
I
arm out?
understand why they're doing it,
Yeah.
but I don't like it because
Yeah.
I just want kids to be multifaceted, to
Right.
develop their athletic abilities and have interest in other things. And
Right.
your ability will lead you back to the one that you do the best.
If you're talented, you're going to be talented. But if you can learn to run and jump, I read a study one time that your vertical leap is the best predictor of athletic success. In tennis and baseball, whatever, like if you measure your vertical leap, that's because it's power to weight. It's how good your muscles are.
Well,
It measures a lot of
eh,
things.
that would probably
Other
explain
sports.
why I wasn't very good then.
My vertical leap's about that high. Yeah, exactly. Did you play baseball?
Just satellite baseball. I played a couple of
Yeah.
years of small college basketball. And that's
Mm,
how I got to the Kansas City area,
okay.
playing NAIA level basketball over at Park College, then is now
Right.
Park University here in suburban Kansas City.
Yeah, I
But they
played.
found me in Crawfordville, Georgia. How in the world
Okay.
they ever find me in Crawfordville, Georgia, I will never understand, but they did. And I left the South, headed out here to the Midwest, didn't know a soul, and I've been here ever since.
That's awesome. I love Georgia. I used to live in Valdosta, Georgia,
Okay, yeah, not too
at
far from
Moody Air Force
Crawfordville.
Base. Yeah, Moody Air Force Base. I played high school baseball, but I wanted to be or shortstop for the Orioles, but there was this guy named Cal Ripken. So I'm sure other than him, I probably would have had a chat. Well, except for I couldn't hit a curveball.
Well, I'll never forget. I was with the late great Buck O'Neill, and the reporter asked him, said, "Mr. O'Neill, how do you hit a great curveball?" Buck said, "By not missing the fastball."
Exactly. That's exactly right. So you mentioned him a bunch of times. Who was Buck O'Neill?
Buck O'Neill was the founder of the Negro League Baseball Museum and
Mm,
a legendary Negro Leaguer himself who
mhm,
began his career in 1937 with the Memphis Red Sox.
mhm.
In the 38 season, he was sent over here in a deal orchestrated by Monarchs owner J.L. Wilkinson. Buck came to Kansas City in 1938. He fell in love with Kansas City, and
Mhm.
Kansas City fell in love with Buck O'Neill. He had a love affair with this city from 1938 to 2006 when he eventually passed away at age 94, a month shy of his 95th birthday. Now,
Wow.
along that journey, he was a first baseman, later player manager for the Monarchs, and then would move into Major League Baseball as a scout. And as a scout, he signed Hall of Fame talent Ernie Banks,
Oh yeah.
Nick Brock, Lee
Oh
Arthur Smith,
wow.
hopefully future Hall of Famer Joe Carter, and
Hmm.
a litany of other great stars that he brought to the major leagues. And then he became the first African American coach with the Cubs in 1962. So
Hmm.
he broke barriers himself. But I think his biggest claim to fame may have occurred in the Ken Burns epic documentary on the history of baseball, where Buck
Baseball.
O'Neill literally stole the show through his narration on the Negro Leagues. Because here what you had. Here's what you had. You had this very charming, gentle man
Right.
telling these wonderful stories to baseball fans, Terry, that
Right.
they never heard before.
Right.
And he did it with a twinkle in his eye and
Right.
a smile that lit up the screen. And America fell in love with Buck O'Neill. He was
Mhm.
82 years old at that time.
Right.
And God blessed him to live another 12 years where
Right.
he was literally gallivanting across this country, preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the
Mhm.
virtues of his museum to any and everybody who would listen. And guess who was riding on his coattail? Old Bob.
Mr. Kendrick, yeah. That Ken Burns documentary came out in 94, and I was in Korea and then I was in Germany. So I was living overseas, and that was in the, there was no Netflix back then. So I
Yeah,
missed out on that. And I've seen it
yeah.
off and on, but I'm going to go back and watch. I just watched The Last Dance. Have you seen that? The Michael
Yes.
Jordan? Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. And during
It
that
was so
period of
good.
coronavirus,
Yeah.
there was nothing, there was no sports really on TV.
Right.
So I think we all were glued to watching The Last Dance. It was so good though.
It was so, and uh, and again, I was overseas during the 90s, and so I kind of missed. I heard about the Bulls and Michael, but I didn't really know all the stuff. Then it was just, and that also, actually, Michael went to play baseball, had a
Yes.
13 game
Yes.
hit streak to start his minor league career or something. He was a
Well,
pretty good baseball player.
they were throwing him fastballs.
Right.
They were throwing him fastballs. And then
And
they
then it
realized
ended,
he could hit
and
the
then it ended.
fastball, and
Right.
then they started breaking that thing off.
And then he went back to the Bulls after that, after he started seeing curveballs. But it goes back to the point, what an athletic talent he was, but it's hard. Baseball is such a, if you just can run, you could probably pick up football and be a receiver or something, but baseball, you got to play. It's a hand-eye. That's a hard sport to get out of, guys like
To
Tim
be
Tebow.
away from and come back to,
Yeah.
or to not play when you're young and grow into the game.
Yeah.
You see it every now and then.
Yeah.
Here in Kansas City, before he left to go back to Milwaukee, Lorenzo Cain picked up the game in high school.
Yeah.
You rarely ever see that happen.
Here in Texas, if you're 7 and you haven't started playing, it's too late.
It's too
Because
late.
you missed out on your 5-year-old and 6-year-old T-ball seasons. And it's sort of funny, but not really. It's actually mostly true for most kids. So who are some other of the baseball players that we've never heard of that we should know about?
There are two guys who immediately come to mind to me. And if you remember being on the Field of Legends where the statues are here at the Negro League Museum.
I got a picture of it on my phone right here.
In center field, there is a guy named Oscar Charleston. And Buck O'Neill would say without hesitation, Terry, that Oscar Charleston was the greatest baseball player he ever saw.
Willie Mays played center field too.
Exactly. And he thought that Willie Mays was the greatest major leaguer that he ever saw, but that Oscar Charleston was the best baseball player he ever saw. That Oscar Charleston was Willie Mays before we ever knew who Willie Mays was.
Right.
Yeah, Oscar Charleston in 1921 led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season.
Wow.
And Buck says he never saw a center fielder who could go back on a ball the way Charleston could, including Mays. Had uncanny instinct to seem to know where that ball was coming on right off the crack of the bat.
Right.
And then the other guy is the guy that was standing at home plate, the great Martin Dihigo from Cuba. Nicknamed him El Maestro, the master, because he could do it all. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. Terry, he is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame. So
And he
he's in
played
the
all 9
Mexican,
positions.
yeah, he's in the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. I mean,
Wow.
just an incredible athlete.
Wow.
About 6'4",
What was his name?
strong, Martin Dehigo.
El Maestro. Martin
El
DeHigo.
Maestro. El
Okay.
Maestro. Some called him El Immortal.
What years did
But
he play? When did he
he
play?
was in the 20s, 30s,
Right.
and 40s. He played a
Right.
long time,
Right.
but primarily 30s and 40s,
Right.
and just a beautiful ball player.
Right.
Movie star, good looks. He had it all.
Right.
He had superstar written all over him.
Right.
And so, but those are two that, instantly come to mind because it just leaves you scratching your head. How in the world did I not know about
Right.
these kinds of ball
Right.
players?
And I'm a baseball nerd. I mean, I love baseball, but the other thing, a lot of the Cubans and the Venezuelans would come play in the Negro leagues, but did white players go play in the Mexican
Mhm.
league and
Mhm.
I'm assuming that black players were doing that also to go
Matter of fact,
down.
they were actually ahead of the major leaguers.
Right.
Negro League players were oftentimes the first Americans to play in many Spanish-speaking countries.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing about that was, Terry, when we went to those countries, we were treated like heroes.
Right.
So now we're staying in the finest hotels, we're eating
Right.
in the finest restaurant that those countries had to offer. And then you come back home and you're treated like a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
So as a result, a lot of Negro League players would actually call those Spanish-speaking countries home.
Yeah.
Because in those countries, they weren't black ball players.
Right.
They were just baseball
They
players.
were ball
They
players.
wanted to be. And then the dark-skinned Spanish-speaking athlete, when they came to this country, they couldn't play in the major leagues either. Now, once upon a time, white Cubans could play in the major leagues, but really you were
Right.
thought to be of any other descent and of darker skin in particular, you
Right.
couldn't play in the major leagues. So they found sanctuary playing in the Negro leagues.
Right. Right. How stupid
I
that,
know.
how
I mean, the
stupid
whole thing, the
that
whole
was.
thing. And that's what when our children walk into the museum, that's exactly what they say about segregation.
Yeah.
That was dumb.
Yeah. Well, everybody loses out. You miss out on the best talent. Like if you want to make your company better or your team better or whatever, you want the best people to do it. And just from not from a moral point of view, just from a selfish, I want
Yeah,
to make more money point of view. You want the best people,
from
and we
a
didn't.
pure
Yeah.
business standpoint,
Yeah.
if you are excluding anyone from having
Yeah.
a seat around the table, you are potentially missing out on great talent.
Yeah. Of
And that
course.
goes back to the what if thing that you had mentioned earlier in the
Yeah.
show. So what happens if the doors had opened before 1947?
Right.
Because I can assure you, they didn't learn how to play baseball after 1947. They were
No.
playing great baseball well
Right.
before Jackie breaks the color barrier.
Just to put the talent that was in the Negro Leagues, like Jackie Robinson was a great major league player, and he came right out of it. It wasn't like it took him 2 decades to develop
No,
talent. The talent was already
it was already
it wasn't
there.
almost, it was made. Well, of course, Satchel Paige was major league ready. A lot
No,
of guys
no,
were
there
ready.
that that league was filled with stars that
Right,
would have been great players. But
right,
the average Negro leaguer would have been an average major leaguer.
right, right,
It was
right.
the same thing.
And the bad ones would have never made it. I mean, it
They
was
never
a
made it. That's
there
exactly
was
it.
talent. Right,
That's
right,
exactly it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, but anyway, it's just such a cool thing. I wonder if we need to make a movie about that. I know 42 was made.
Man, I
There's
keep
there's got
pitching.
to be other stories.
Terry, I keep pitching, man. Every chance I get, I'm pitching the idea that there needs to be some kind of cinematic portrayal of the Negro Leagues because these stories are plentiful and man, they too good. You don't even have to make them up. You don't have to fictionalize the stories to make them entertaining. Just tell the real stories. In this case, truth is much better than fiction. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. No, it just leaves you shaking your head on some of these stories. And I hope whoever listening to the show, if they get an inkling to do this, please call old Bob and make him the executive producer.
Hey, Bob, I directed a film last year.
Oh, did you really?
And this is kind of the new universe I want to move into. Yeah, it's called One More Orbit. It's a documentary, but I fell in love with filmmaking, and I've got a idea for a baseball TV show I want to do, but I would love, like, what I want to do in life is direct features, and so we need
Oh,
to talk
that's
after.
cool, man.
Let's
That
talk
is
after the
cool.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
No, that's
Jackie Robinson
awesome.
story, 42 that was the first. It's funny. It was the first movie also, and not only was the first player, but there's other stories too that are really good. We'll have to talk.
There are so
Yeah.
many stories. One of my favorite stories that I oftentimes share, and it falls into that category. You can't make this stuff up. It's too good. Well, there was a team called the House of David, a semi-pro barnstorming team out of Benton Harbor, Michigan, called the House of David. They were a
Mhm.
religious sect based
Hmm.
out of Benton Harbor. And Terry, they were all characterized by their very long hair and very long whiskers. Now, this is an all white team.
Jewish
Uh-huh.
team?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And they were actually Christians. They were actually
Oh,
Christians. Yeah.
wow. Okay.
But they were mimicking David from the Bible,
Right.
which is why they grew their hair long and their
Right.
whiskers. But they
Uh-huh.
play a great role in black baseball
Huh.
because they would barnstorm all
Right.
over the country playing
Right.
with and against Negro League teams,
Right.
most notably the Kansas City Monarchs. Well, in 1934, the Denver Post tournament becomes the first organized baseball tournament to integrate.
Hmm.
The very next year, the House of David would go out and recruit Satchel Paige to pitch for them. Now, Satchel wanting to look like his white teammates. Again, I told you can't make this stuff up. It's too good. Satchel wanting to look like his white teammates put on a wig and a fake red beard
Oh
and
my
would
God.
strike out 51 hitters in 3 games. And the House of David would win the $7,500 prize money. And you can best believe that old Satchel got a large percentage of that $7,500 prize money.
That was a lot of money back then.
Oh man, that's big time. That's big time.
That's an amazing. I had never. They're like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, except for they're white
They were white.
with long hair.
They were white. But the other interesting thing about the House of David, which is essentially a cult,
Yeah.
but they would not tolerate, so they wouldn't play in a town where their black players who were playing with them and against them, if they
Right.
couldn't stay. If they
Right.
couldn't stay in that town, they wouldn't play. And so they were very in tune
Right.
to the racism that was a part, the Jim Crow
Yeah.
circumstances that were so prevalent in our country at that time.
Right. Yeah. That's something that folks don't know. I mean, that's been portrayed in a lot of films. And people need to realize that it used to be that way. But that's an amazing story. I never, and that's the thing. There was just again, we've talked about it. There was so much talent,
Oh,
and they showed up in different ways. And nowadays, if you're talented, you're gonna get funneled into the minor league system and hopefully eventually into major leagues. But back then, it was kind of random. And Satchel, like, that was his income. Like, you'd have, oh, here's
oh
this
yeah.
random team, I'll sign with it.
Also,
It
yeah,
wasn't like
no,
steady income, right? You kind of had
yeah.
to
Well,
make
with
things happen.
Satchel, and particularly with Satchel, because everybody wanted to see
Right.
Satchel Paige pitch.
Right.
Yeah, so he
He was
was
a draw.
literally
Yeah.
riding into towns.
Right.
He would either pitch for the town team,
Right.
they'd hire him, pay him a percentage of the gate, and the
Right.
entire town was shut down to watch the old man do his thing. He'd ride out to the next town,
Right.
and as a result, Satchel Paige probably was the highest paid ball player in the country. Then he
Right.
had to work that way in order to get it, and he
Right.
would work year round, to do
Right.
so. But he's pitching 2 or 3 innings almost every single day.
And how, back in the day, it was not just black, it was all players were pitching a lot. Like, complete games were normal. A lot of teams, relievers would never even come in. That I don't even know what the pitch count was, and it's such a
There
different
wasn't one.
thing.
There was no pitch count.
When I was a kid, I had this. It was like a MLB books about how to pitch, and how to play interfield, and what it was. I love baseball, so when I was 10, I was reading these things, and when my son was playing, I went back and reread it. And the advice for pitchers was like, pitch more and just throw more, and you need to throw more pitches and throw harder. And it was very different advice than what we give people today. But the guys lasted, and yeah, I don't know, Walter Johnson and the old pitchers. They'd pitch 350
Well,
innings a year, 30 complete
yeah.
games a
Oh,
year.
easily. And
Yeah.
by Satchel's estimation, Terry, he pitched in over 2,600 games in his career.
Oh my
I mean,
god.
it's hard to even fathom that.
Yeah,
But
it
again, he
is.
was pitching almost every day
Right,
because everybody wanted to see him,
right,
and he was savvy enough to negotiate a percentage of the gate
right,
along that tour. And you talked about it, him joining the Kansas City A's in 1965 when he
right,
was believed to be 59 years old.
right.
And he does indeed, folks, pitch 3 shutout innings against the Boston Red Sox, giving up only 1 hit in those 3 innings. It's a great trivia question.
Yeah.
1965 Boston Red Sox. Who
I
got that lone hit off of Satchel? It's a Hall of Famer, but it's not Ted Williams.
it's not I was gonna say Ted Williams. So Carl Yastrzemski?
That's who got it. Yaz.
There you go.
Yaz was
Wow.
a youngster himself.
Right.
Yaz is the only guy to get a hit off the old man. Yaz gets a double against Satchel. Satchel leaves him at third, shut down everybody else over 3 of the most remarkably pitched innings in baseball history. And a young Rico Petrocelli was on that 65 Red Sox team. And Terry, he told me this. He said, we all went to the plate hacking away at that old man. They thought they were going to light this old dude up.
Right.
And he says at that time, Satchel's fastball was still 86, 87 miles per hour, and he's painting the black. And they're
Right.
all turning to go back to the dugout in disbelief that they couldn't hit that old man.
I couldn't I just read that story, like I said, prepping for this interview. I couldn't believe that. That's just amazing. And there's so many stories like this. And that's why I love your museum. And it's there in Kansas City where the Kansas City Royals are. So I hope, and we've talked about this before, I hope that major league teams, when they come by, they bring
Yeah.
especially the young kids in so they can go, oh, wow. It's such a good outreach, especially in
Yeah.
2021 in America. Like there's
now that we're moving out of this pandemic, we're starting to see more of the clubs come out this year. We
good.
had great hope during the 100th anniversary celebration of the Negro Leagues before the
Right.
pandemic struck that
Right.
we'd see virtually every major league team that came into Kansas City were
Right.
going to stop by here, but the pandemic obviously
Yeah.
killed those opportunities.
Right.
But now we're starting to see an uptick in that, and so we've welcomed. Just last week, I had members of the Pittsburgh Pirates here, and
Right.
we had members of the Detroit Tigers here the week before that.
Right.
We're prepping for other teams. Red Sox are coming next week, and so it's great to see the young athlete here at the museum because it
Mhm.
goes back to something else you said earlier in the show. Young ball players not knowing about the history of the Negro Leagues. Well, no sport holds to its history the way baseball does.
Absolutely.
And the Negro Leagues are an important part of the history of our game. And
Mhm.
so you should know about this history. And I'll
Absolutely.
be honest, Terry, it never gets old for me.
I can
Every time that I get to walk a young athlete through the
Right.
museum, I relish in it. I
Right.
love sharing the stories. I love seeing their reaction
Right.
to the story. And I think they walk away from this experience with a new outlook and a new perspective because as human beings, I think we are wired to complain. We are going
Yes.
to complain even when we don't have anything to complain about. We'll
Right.
find something to complain about.
Yeah.
And sometimes the coaches will say, well, my guys were crying about a late night charter flight. Yeah,
Right.
they were bemoaning a late night charter flight. And then you come in here and you see these instances where these players could go into a town by bus and they would ride hours, fill
Yeah.
up the ballpark, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the
Right.
same fans who had just cheered them or not have a place to stay. So they sleep on the bus and
Right.
eat their peanut butter and crackers.
Right.
All of a sudden, that late night charter flight, it doesn't seem so bad after all. So you do
Gratitude.
gain a
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. That is so cool. Well, I tell you, Bob, the museum has definitely picked the right man to lead it because you're so infectious. You're so excited about this. You're a great story. When I was there, you were sharing these stories with me. And so the museum it's not downtown Kansas City, but it's a
Just
few miles
east of
out.
just a
Yeah.
little bit east of downtown Kansas City, historic
Right.
18th and Vine. Yeah, the
That's right.
legendary
18th and
historic
Vine.
18th and Vine Jazz District.
And you have a jazz museum next door.
Right next door. The
Yeah.
American Jazz Museum, our sister museum,
Right.
right next door. So it's very unique to Kansas City to have two exceptional cultural institutions
Right.
under one roof.
And food nearby.
Oh man, great, great
it's a good place
barbecue.
to go. Yeah.
Yeah, great barbecue. Legendary barbecue establishments like Arthur Bryant's and Gates, which are the two oldest homegrown barbecue establishments. Both of them are renowned.
Right.
I eat in them way too much.
Hey, you only live once, man. You got to take advantage. It's, you eat there, just eat less. Like that's what
You
I
just
found.
gotta eat less. It's not like somebody's just putting the fork in my mouth. I'm
Right.
still
Right.
lifting it myself.
I know. You have to have the discipline. If you can eat a little bit, that's fine. Just don't eat it quite as much. Well, I'll tell you, if for those who listen, if you love baseball, if you love America or sports, I highly recommend go out and check this out. It's a great history. It's a history that a lot of us should know that a lot of folks don't. And it's just fun. It's a cool,
It really
cool
is,
thing.
because it's somewhat counterintuitive for a lot of people,
Mhm.
because the conditions, Terry, that dictated a need for a Negro Leagues,
Right.
obviously those are very sad,
Yeah.
sorrowful.
Right.
Segregation was a horrible chapter in
It
this
was.
country's history.
Yeah.
But the Negro Leagues themselves, there's nothing sad about that story, because that
Exactly.
is triumph over
Right.
adversity. And
Right.
that's what we celebrate. And we treat the story for exactly what it is, a
Right.
celebration. But
Right.
it's the celebration of the power of the human spirit to
Right.
persevere and prevail.
They overcame, they were given lemons and they made lemonade.
You make lemonade.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and then eventually they mixed in with the tea, and now we have Arnold Palmer iced tea. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. I just thought of that. But it's good. You come away from it happy and thinking,
do.
man, that was cool. And
No,
it's
you leave
a good
here
story.
cheering the power of the human spirit. It's
Yeah.
very triumphant in nature. It is
Yeah.
uplifting. For
Yeah.
those who think that it's going to be sad or somber, nah, it's not at all.
Yeah, I think I still have never been to the Hall of Fame. There's certain things you got to do in life, and going to the Hall of Fame is a pilgrimage you should make. But I think going to your museum there in Kansas City is another pilgrimage that fathers should take their sons, and mom should, everybody should go.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And the great thing is we're in the middle of the country. We're a lot easier to get to.
It's not like you're in Seattle or in Miami you're not. You're right. It's literally right in the middle.
Right in the middle of the country.
Exactly.
In the nation's heartland. So please come and see us.
I love it. Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming on today. This is awesome. It's definitely a different than my normal podcast, but this is great. This is one of the best for sure. I loved it. So thanks.
Well, man, I appreciate you reaching out. Thanks so much for having me. Again, it's great to see you, and thank you for that amazing gift that you gave us, that the world is now enjoying, a Jackie Robinson jersey flown in outer space. How about that?
I thought it was pretty cool.
It was very cool. As
Yeah.
we coined Jackie, the first man to walk on the moon. And so this is only appropriate.
Exactly. I love it. All right. Well, I wonder if it glows in the dark. You should turn off the lights and see if it glows after being in space for 200 days.
Yeah, no, I'd have to check. I have to make sure we check that out, because I haven't been in there after dark when the lights were shut off. Where I have to take a look
See if
and
it
see.
glows. I don't think it will, but anyway. All right. Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Terry, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.